Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Synopsis. She has always believed that she and her boyfriend were destined to be together forever. But on his 18th birthday, her dreams are shattered when he reveals a shocking truth that changes everything she thought she knew about their future. Heartbroken and betrayed, she flees her pack and spends a year in self-imposed exile, grappling with her pain and seeking solace away from the only world she's ever known. When tragedy strikes, she is forced to return to her pack, only to find it under the command of an enigmatic and feared new Alpha Maddox. As she begins to rebuild her life amidst the shadows of her past, she finds unexpected comfort in the new Alpha's presence and starts to consider the possibility of new beginnings. However, just as she dares to hope for a fresh start, she uncovers a truth about her true mate that threatens to upend her fragile peace. In a twist of fate, her journey of healing and rediscovery leads her to confront the reality of her heart's deepest desires, and she must navigate a tangled web of love, loyalty, and destiny. As the lines between past and future blur, she must decide if she can embrace the unexpected and find her place in a world where nothing is as it seems. Episode 1. Chapter 1-8. I didn't stop running until I was deep into the forest, my lungs burning from being deprived of oxygen. My wolf, Maya, was furious. She was hesitant about Tyler in the beginning, but was eventually won over. She thought he was our mate too. While I was heartbroken and fighting back tears, Maya was seething. I closed my eyes and allowed her to take over, making her promise that she wouldn't go and hunt Tyler down. Maya carried us farther into the woods, and I allowed myself to sink into the furthest depths of her mind. My head was still racing with what had just happened. I wanted to turn everything off for just a few moments. I couldn't handle it. Hours and hours had passed, but I hardly noticed. I drifted off as Maya hunted and continued running. I finally came to my senses when soft grass tickled my naked back. The familiar scent of herbs filled the air. Basil, lavender, and mint invaded my nose and soothed my aching heart. "Lola, dear? Is that you?" A withered voice called out and I felt my heart jump. "You brought me here?" I asked Maya in surprise. "We need her. We're not going back," she growled, resenting me for thwarting her plans on attacking Tyler. "Grandma." My voice cracked and I sat up from the grass. It was nearing dawn, the sun was just beginning to rise and it cast orange hues along her small cottage. Her herb gardens lifted and swayed in the breeze. I had always loved coming to Grandma's house. My mom forbade me and my brother from coming back here, holding a grudge against my grandma for years. The story of my mom meeting my dad isn't one I like to talk about. My mom and dad aren't mates. Mom rejected her mate when she was younger, seeking out my dad when she realized his mate had died. My grandma always resented her for that, for throwing the mate bond away. "Lola, what on earth are you doing here?" my grandma exclaimed, wrapping a woven blanket around my exposed body. She pulled me into a hug and I could feel myself break down at her familiar scent and touch. My grandma had this quality that made everyone love her. She was nearly impossible not to get along with. My grandma matched my extremely short height of 5'2", and had the same long black hair. She was more withered, with laugh lines circling her mouth and eyes, but she had never looked better to me. "I missed you so much," I cried into her shoulder. I even remembered how she smelled. So many different herbs and apples. Grandma had a couple of apple trees she absolutely adored. She would always be making a pie or some kind of dessert when we used to visit. "What's got you all worked up, Lola?" Grandma frowned, is it that boy you're dating? Grandma was always supportive of anything I wanted to do, she just always reminded me to think things through. Grandma led me into her little cottage and sat me by her fireplace. Tell me, what happened? She sat next to me, placing a fresh set of clothes in my lap. And tell her, I did. I poured my heart out for what seemed like hours. She never once threw my mistake back in my face, like my mother would have. I don't want to go back, Grandma. I can't face them. I sniffled. Then you won't go back. You'll stay here with me. My grandma nodded with finality. She had that determined look on her face that said nobody will stand in my way. What about Mom and Dad? I sighed, knowing a huge fight between them was brewing. You let me deal with your parents. My grandma shook her head, placing a cup of tea in my hands. 1 year later, haha. I laughed, launching myself through the air. I maneuvered around the muscular arms that reached out to grab me. I dropped to the ground, dodging limbs and landing my own blows as I went. Good Lola, don't let me land any blows. Chris's weary voice yelled out. Just a few more seconds. He's getting tired. Maya coached me. I continued to dodge each move Chris made, while landing my own in the process. I could feel him breaking down, growing tired as he threw all he had at me. Now! Maya yelled in my head. I leaped at Chris suddenly, his eyes widening in shock before he could defend himself. He turned away, as if he were going to run. I landed on his back and wrapped my arms around his neck, putting pressure on his windpipe. After a second or two of holding it there, I jumped off his back and beamed up at him. That was some good work, kid. Chris nodded appreciatively. Thanks. I smirked, finally having gotten the upper hand on him. Chris rolled his eyes and frowned at me. Don't go now. You still need to work on building your strength. I know. Just let me have this win. I sighed, smiling at my grandma as she came out of the cottage with food and drinks. I had been living with Grandma for almost a year, only talking to my parents once a week. I stopped calling my mom after a month. She insisted on giving me updates on Tyler and his mate, which I learned was named Brittany. I kept in constant contact with my dad, the only person who seemed to understand the decision I had made. Even my older brother Sean, rarely called. Sean had started taking over his duties as beta, my father having retired almost a year ago. Life had been amazing living with my grandma. I spent my 18th birthday in her cottage, picking herbs and making pastries with the apples she had picked. My grandma lived a simple life, but I had quickly grown to love it. She introduced me to her neighbor, Chris. Chris happened to be a werewolf like Grandma and I. In Chris's prime he was one of the best warriors in history, and even a beta at one point. No one knew what happened to him after he disappeared, no one but my grandma. Chris agreed to train me, looking at my short stature, and deciding I needed to know how to protect myself. Chris taught me to use what I had in my favor. Being 5'2" and 105 pounds didn't give me much to work with. After training with Chris for almost a year, I could easily handle myself. I'm small and fast, which means men twice my size had to work even harder to land any blows. Lola, dear. Your brother's on the line waiting for you. Grandma informed me, placing a sandwich in my hand as I walked into the house. Hello. I said through a mouthful of sandwich. Why would Sean be calling me? Lola? I have some news. Sean's voice responded from the other end, sounding a lot deeper than usual. What's up? I frowned, sitting on the arm of the couch as I munched on my sandwich. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mom's dead, Lola," Sean replied in a gruff voice. I felt my face scrunch up in confusion. How could Mom be dead? Everything seemed normal when Dad called me every week. What? How? I demanded. Just come home, Lola. I don't want to explain this over the phone. Sean sighed, adding, Dad needs you. I'll talk to Grandma. I sighed. The last thing in the world I wanted was to go home. The thought of running into Tyler or his mate put a sour taste in my mouth. After Chris went home for the day, I told Grandma the news. As much as Grandma didn't like my mom, she was still sad to hear what had happened. And he wouldn't tell you what happened to her. Grandma sighed. He said he wanted to explain in person. He said Dad needs me. I frowned at her, and she knew what I needed to do. Then I suppose we better get packing. Grandma frowned, worrying about her widowed son. You're coming too? I nearly gasped. A stern frown crossed her face, but I could see her eyes twinkling. Of course, no granddaughter of mine is going back to her slimy ex without some backup. I don't know what I'd do without you. I sighed, pulling her in for a hug. Just don't expect me to get into any fist fights, I'm too old for that stuff. No one wants to see a 60-year-old werewolf fight. Grandma cackled. I rolled my eyes at her, but I couldn't help the giggle that slipped from my lips. You'll never be old to me. I smirked, following her into the bedroom to pack our clothes away. Grandma stopped by Chris's house the next morning, letting him know where we had gone. She promised him a year's supply of apple pies if he took care of her herb garden. We hopped into my grandma's car, and the anticipation bubbled in my stomach. Everything about me had changed in such a short amount of time. I was no longer weak or shallow. I wouldn't let anyone walk all over me ever again. Are you ready for this? My grandma frowned, her silver eyes meeting my identical ones. Not at all. I gave her a weak smile. Chin up. If any of those pups mess with you, bite their head off. My grandma encouraged me. Through the nerves and resentment I held for my old pack, I laughed at my grandma and braced myself. Turns out I wasn't the only thing that had changed. Chapter 2. The drive back to my old pack was only 5 hours. While I remembered Tyler finding his mate like it was yesterday, the run to my grandma's house had been hazy. You ran 5 hours? I asked Maya, somewhat shocked. We needed to get the hell out of there. She grumbled, and now we're going right back. We don't have a choice. I sighed, but we're both different now. You're right, we are. Maya growled smugly. We pulled up to the edge of the pack's territory, escorted to the side of the road by some of the wolves who were guarding the perimeter. I was surprised that I didn't recognize any of these wolves. They emerged from the forest wearing nothing but low-hanging sweatpants. I tried to keep my gaze to myself, but I'm still half human. What is your business coming here? One of the men spoke up. His build was huge, and he had a long scar running down his bicep. We're here to visit family. My brother's the beta. I replied, looking at each of their faces. There really wasn't anyone here that I recognized. Had the pack grown in the time that I was gone? Beta Drake. The man had a confused look on his face. What? No, Beta Sean. I scowled. Since when did Tyler have a beta named Drake? I wondered if everything was okay with Sean's position in the pack. You typically have to do something really bad to lose your position like that. A look of understanding crossed the man's face, and he glanced at the other men with him. go on through." He nodded once, and my grandma wasted no time in pulling away. Well, that sure was strange. My grandma looked at me and frowned. I'm sure she was thinking the same thing as me. It definitely was. I frowned. We drove through the center of town and I was shocked to see a ton of new faces. Something had definitely happened while I was gone. I vaguely remembered Tyler telling me about another pack that needed help. Maybe they finally joined forces. We pulled into the driveway of my old house. The white paint was now faded. It looked like I had been gone for much longer than a year. The flowers that were once outside were now wilted and dead. My mom was the one to take care of the flowers out front. How long has she been dead for? I hesitated at the door, wondering if I should knock or just walk in. My train of thought was interrupted as my grandma opened the door and walked into the house. A shocked Sean was sitting on the couch, my dad sitting off to the side in his recliner. "Lola!" my dad exclaimed, looking more surprised than ever. My dad and Sean looked me up and down, noticing the changes I had been through in the past year. My raven-colored hair had grown longer than ever, now reaching my waist. My silver eyes were much brighter, teeming with life. My skin was clear and porcelain-like, and I had lost some of the baby fat I had carried with me. The fat quickly was replaced with muscle. "Hi, Dad." I smiled at him, walking into his arms. I breathed in his scent of cologne. "I missed you, kid." My dad grumbled, ruffling my hair before he turned to his mom. His face lit up like a little kid. "It's good to see you, Ma." He pulled her in for a hug and held on for dear life. "Now tell me what the hell is going on." I scowled at Sean, who was simply watching their exchange with Dad. Dad sighed and sat back down on his recliner, looking tired and somewhat beaten down. "Well, go on. I'm not going to break if you talk about it," he grumbled at Sean. My grandma stood off to the side, her hand on her son's shoulder. "Tyler." Sean huffed. I rolled my eyes. "Wow, so surprised." "Keep going." "I don't know if he told you, but Tyler was supposed to help another pack. They pissed off the alpha of the Crescent Pack and needed backup in case they went to war." Sean started, and I was already becoming bored. Tyler's mistakes didn't surprise me. After finally leaving home, I was able to see what a complete moron he was. "Okay, and..." I drug my words out, letting him know I didn't care about any of the small details. "Well, Tyler refused to help them. Then, Tyler kept talking on the Crescent Pack. He pissed off their alpha, pissed him off real bad." Sean shook his head as if he were trying to get rid of a bad memory. "He didn't." I sighed, shaking my head. I know Tyler's inflated ego was going to bite him in the ass. His father was an alpha and he was turning out to be the same. "They came here, Lola. They declared war on us." Sean frowned, glancing at Dad. I couldn't help but feel confused. Sure, there were a lot of new faces but everything seemed the same. There was no way Tyler defeated the alpha of the Crescent Pack. What happened? I frowned, looking between Sean and my dad's grim faces. "I'll tell you what happened," my dad spat angrily. "Not a single pack would help Tyler. Tyler made us all fight. Every man and woman had to fight. Your mom died fighting. I couldn't get to her in time." My dad's voice broke off with a mournful sigh. How could he do that?" I said the words more to myself. I knew Tyler was bad, but this was worse than I could imagine. Then again, they hadn't finished the story. And you know what the worst part of all of this is? Tyler ran. and escaped while the rest of us were fighting for our lives. My dad spat, now he was shaking with anger. My grandma gasped, and they gave us a few moments to process what Dad had said. Abandoning your pack was something no alpha had ever done. Being an alpha wasn't a job, it was something embedded deep inside of you. An alpha would sooner be tortured and die with their pack than to leave everyone behind. It went against everything we know as werewolves. Dad, calm down. If he ever comes back, Alpha will kill him. Sean's face turned grim again. Alpha? Alpha who? I questioned. Once we realized Tyler had left us all to die, we did the only thing we could. We surrendered. Sean frowned. We have a new Alpha now. Alpha Maddox. We're part of the Crescent Pack. Sean grumbled, obviously not enjoying the situation. I wondered what that would mean for his position as Beta. At least Alpha Maddox would never leave his pack behind. Dad spat, he may be ruthless and cruel, but he'd sooner die than abandon his people. After the long and painful conversation, they gave me and my grandma time to settle in. I nearly cried when I saw my room was exactly how I had left it. I ripped the pictures of Tyler and I down with a furious growl. Better that girl be his mate than us. We'd never abandon our pack like that. Maya spat. We kind of did abandon our pack. I replied to her with a frown. That's different, Lola. We're not Luna, we're not betas or anything. We had no obligation to this pack. Especially after Tyler. Maya growled, but her words made sense. She was right though, if we were Luna, we would have died along with our friends and family. After settling in, Grandma and I went back downstairs. Grandma insisted on making dinner even though my dad grumbled in disagreement. I knew he was happy to see his mom though. He needed his family after losing Mom. She may have not been his mate, but he'd been with her for 20 years. As we ate dinner, I nearly jumped off my seat hearing the mind link click in my head. The mind link hadn't worked since I decided to leave the pack. A deep, husky voice ran through my head. I practically shivered as it swirled in my ear, around my head, and out the other. Report to training at the pack house, 10 a.m. Do not be late. I look forward to meeting you. A male's husky voice rolled around in my head. Rough and commanding. Was that Alpha Maddox? I found myself speaking out loud. Dad, Sean, and Grandma gave me looks of confusion. What, Lola? My dad frowned, uneaten spaghetti hung from his fork. A guy told me to report for training tomorrow. I sounded unsure. Was it his beta? That was Alpha Maddox. Sean nodded, his lips pressed in a thin line. My dad nodded, he likes doing things himself. He makes everyone train. I scowled at the two of them. I didn't like being forced into doing anything. Don't worry, Lola. If you're no good, he won't make you fight. He just likes to see what everyone is capable of. Sean told me, his frown permanently etched onto his face. I can fight just fine. I snapped at him. I no longer wanted to be treated like some dainty little girl. I may be small, but I can handle my own. Since when? Finally a smirk formed on his face, the only other expression I had seen on his face was a frown. I glared at him, since I left this pack. I haven't been sitting for an entire year. I'll be there tomorrow for training too. We'll see how good you really are, little sis. He smirked at me, only pissing me off further. Tyler was a big advocate on men fight better than women. It was good to know my brother felt the same. Chris pushed me to the breaking point more times than I could count, I had no doubt that I could handle most of the male wolves here. I spent the rest of the afternoon with my family. Grandma tried to raise their moods, but they had been sitting in misery for who knows how long. I followed my grandma outside and helped her straighten out the wilting flowers that crowded the outside of the house. By the time we were finished pulling up the dead flowers and planting new ones, I was exhausted and covered in dirt. "And you call yourself old?" I huffed at her, taking long gulps of the lemonade she had made for me. She chuckled at my statement and rolled her eyes. "Years and years of working in my garden, dear. Let's make that a part of your training." She laughed, and I gave her a frightened look. "You're gonna work me to death, Grandma." And I thought Chris was an evil dictator. I shuddered in fear. My grandma cackled and shooed me inside. By the time I finally collapsed on my bed, I was knocked out cold without a second thought. Chapter 3. I woke to the sound of banging. Startled from my sleep, I jumped out of bed just in time for my bedroom door to open. "Lola, what are you still doing here?" my dad exclaimed, his eyes darting around at my restless appearance. "Hey!" was the first thing to leave my lips. For a minute there I hadn't even remembered leaving Grandma's house. With an exasperated look my dad replied, "Hell, you're late for training." "What?" I gasped. "Why didn't Sean wake me up? He has patrol early in the mornings." My dad groaned, already off to a bad start. "Well, go so I can get dressed." I huffed, sprinting to my suitcase and yanking out the first thing I saw. Once my door closed, I slipped on a black sports bra and a pair of black leggings. I hastily combed through my hair using the bathroom mirror. In the back of my head I remembered Tyler's comment about me looking goth. I smirked into the mirror. I darted down the stairs, nearly toppling my grandma over on the way. "Lola, if you end my life knocking me down these stairs, I'll haunt you," Grandma called out after me, but I was already barreling through the front door. My stomach rumbled, demanding we go back home and eat some breakfast. As much as I'd love to oblige, I couldn't. "Goddess, he's going to be pissed." Maya huffed. "Well, I didn't see you waking me up on time either," I grumbled at her. "I was busy." Maya shrugged, giving an excuse. "You're a wolf who lives in my head, what could you have possibly been doing?" I shook my head at her. Maya's voice went silent in my head and I rolled my eyes. For once I was thankful that our house was a short run from the pack house. By the time my lungs had started to burn, I could see the others already training. I skidded to a halt in front of everyone. From the looks of it, there were at least 30 other wolves present for training. I instantly noticed Alpha Maddox's men lingering around. Each one looked like they were half giant, and many had gruesome scars on different parts of their body. Each one was completely hot in an animalistic sort of way. I had been so busy ogling the shirtless men that I hadn't heard it when someone behind me cleared their throat. I spun around and nearly smacked into someone's chest. "Well," Maya's breath caught in her throat. I could only assume I was looking into the eyes of Alpha Maddox. His eyes were the color of liquid honey, and at the moment they were set directly on my face. "Didn't I specifically tell you not to be late?" His husky voice was hard, lacking any emotion other than impatience. "Please," Maya rolled her eyes from the looks of it, "sleep was definitely better than this." The tone of his voice pissed me off. He sounded like your typical hot-blooded alpha. Without thinking it through, I felt the words fall from my lips. "I'm not good with rules," I said bluntly, looking up at him. The guy had to be over 6 feet tall. I stifled a snicker as I wondered if he could give me a couple inches. He towered over me and made me look like a kid. I watched in silence as his dark eyebrow raised at my words, his eyes silently fuming. I kept my eyes trained on his own, but I noticed the muscle in his jaw moving. I guess he didn't like being disobeyed. Well, we're going to have to change that. His voice was cold as he analyzed me. I couldn't tell if I felt like a piece of meat or an innocent doe lined up for slaughter. If he wasn't so drop-dead hot, I'd tell him to go FK himself. Maya rolled her eyes. Geez, you're worse than I am. I snickered. Yeah, that's doubtful. Maya smirked. Good luck. Again, my stupid lips uttered the words before I could think them through. His lips were pressed in a tight line and I desperately wanted to laugh. I expected a lot more from the deadliest of alphas. Good luck? Good luck? Are you trying to get us killed on our first day back? Maya snapped. You're the one who said you'd tell him to go FK himself. I rolled my eyes at her. Well, I didn't, did I? Maya huffed. What is your name, pup? His cold voice growled. I ignored the fact that the hairs on my arms were standing on end and answered the hot-blooded alpha. Lola. And yours? I smirked, already knowing his name by the dominance and authority he exuded. Your new alpha. He replied, gauging the reaction on my face. Did he really think I had no idea who he was? Well, who was I to ruin the fun? As if that wasn't obvious. Maya laughed. I let my smirk deepen. Ooh, really? I let fake shock fall over my face. I could see the anger flash in his eyes and I waited. Now, I don't normally have a death wish, but I already started off on a bad note. I could tell from a mile away that Alpha Maddox was one of those typical alphas who wanted everyone to fall in line like good little subjects. I had a big problem with that, and it didn't help that I seemed to blurt out the first thing on my mind. I was surprised when Alpha Maddox turned away, facing the other wolves in training. Attention everyone! Alpha Maddox snapped. In an instant everyone's eyes were on Alpha Maddox and I refused to cringe under the attention. Alpha Maddox's voice took on a rough quality, one that nearly made me shiver. I couldn't help but notice Sean's fear-stricken eyes on me, wondering what the hell I was doing. Lola decided sleeping in was more important than attending training today. Unfortunately, we no longer have anyone available for her to partner up with. Alpha Maddox's deep voice rumbled over everyone, commanding our full attention. I let the little glimmer of hope blossom inside of me. Maybe I'd be able to just sit out today. Not to worry. I will be Lola's partner. Alpha Maddox's harsh words were like a bucket of cold water. You've really done it now. Maya groaned. Crap, what do I do? I asked her. Try not to die. Maya shrugged. Thank you for your infinite wisdom, Maya. I rolled my eyes at her. It's not a problem. I live to serve. She snickered, but for real, tries not to die. You know how to fight. You'll never win, but you can still put up a fight. She shrugged. Everyone began training at Alpha Maddox's words. Sean sent me one last pity and panic-filled glance before he turned back to his opponent. I huffed, and turned to look at Alpha Maddox. I wanted a good look at the guy. Much to my dismay, my jaw dropped. Alpha Maddox had to have been the most attractive male I had ever seen. His hair was the color of molten chocolate, short but also intoxicatingly messy. I tried not to drool as he slipped his shirt off, revealing a scarred but chiseled chest. Close your mouth, Lola. Alpha Maddox snapped, and I rolled my eyes at him. I could hear the growl rumble in his chest and I mentally slapped myself. You really shouldn't keep pissing the dude off, you're about to fight him. Maya sighed, but I could tell she was enjoying my resistance. Yeah, I know. I grumbled. Before I had the chance to react, Alpha Maddox had launched himself at me. I grunted as his fist connected with my stomach, forcing me backwards. I could feel myself losing balance as he came in for another strike. I let gravity take me backwards and rolled out of his way just in time to dodge another punch. I got to my feet and shook off the pain. This was the same as training with Chris. I could do this. I couldn't let his impeccable godlike looks distract me. I watched as he lunged forward, his arm extending to throw a punch. I feigned turning left only to roll under his legs and launch myself at his back. I clung to his back for dear life. At one point I almost started laughing, I was like a miniature backpack on him. I jumped off his back just in time for him to roll across the ground. That would have hurt. Maya muttered, knowing he intended to do that with us still locked on his back. If that hurt Alpha Maddox, he showed no signs of it. You're fast. Alpha Maddox pointed out, throwing a couple more hits to my face and body, which thankfully I managed to dodge. This guy was fast. Faster than Chris, and that was really saying something. I am. And you hit hard. I snapped, dodging another punch. I didn't move fast enough and winced as his fist grazed my hip. I wasn't sure how long I spent dodging Alpha Maddox's kicks and blows. By the time Maddox stopped attacking me, I was completely exhausted. While I managed to dodge some of his hits, he was way faster than the normal werewolf. My entire body ached and groaned. Alpha Maddox was absolutely lethal. He must have been good at controlling his anger, cause he had at least 35 openings to kill me. Just as I was about to leave with the rest of the group, Alpha Maddox cut me off. He stood in front of me, his arms crossed against his chest. He had slipped his shirt back on after training. Peeling my eyes away from the bulging veins on his arms, I looked into his toffee-colored eyes. Did you learn something today, Lola? His rough voice was cold and almost condescending. Again, it seemed as though I had no self-control around him. My lips spoke the words before my brain had a chance to catch up. Yeah, your nose twitches before you throw a punch. I said deadpan. I watched as flecks of gold swirled in his eyes and wondered if his wolf were close to surfacing. I could feel my heart pounding, and I don't think it was from the hours of training I just went through. Are you purposely disobedient, or is this just something you enjoy doing? The muscles in jaw were moving again as he gave me a strange look. It's just one of my very attractive qualities. I shrugged and turned on my heel before I could say anything that really pissed him off. I collapsed in a heap on the couch, waking my dad from his recliner with a startled grunt. I see training went well. He grumbled, I see you're still alive. As if it were an achievement. My body hurts. I groaned, flopping my head back on the couch. Alpha was Lola's partner for the day. Sean smirked, but he also seemed relieved. Shut up and let me suffer in silence. I grumbled, happily accepting the cookie my grandmother offered me. Don't be late tomorrow and maybe it won't happen again. Sean smirked. Tomorrow? I moaned. I had completely acted out today, not even thinking about tomorrow. Great. Chapter 4. I stayed on the couch wallowing in my pain until the smell of dinner lifted my spirits. My grandma was cooking again, and as much as my dad protested, I could tell he had missed her cooking. We sat around the table eating dinner and exchanging stories. Dad wanted to know all about what I had gotten into while I was gone. So you already finished high school? Sean asked. I could tell he was somewhat jealous. Sean graduated a year ago at the age of 18. While I was homeschooled, he was forced to go to the local public school. Yup, I officially graduated. I teased, sticking my tongue out at him. My dad smiled at us as we bickered, now only one more year to go and you can find your mate. My dad winked at me. My 19th birthday wasn't for a couple months now. From 18 every werewolf is able to sense their mate. That is, if they're within sniffing distance. Though I haven't. Geez, can you imagine that? Her mate is gonna have to put up with a lot. Sean smirked at me. I rolled my eyes at him. I'm definitely not going to make it easy on him. So, who the hell trained you while you were gone? Alpha's been here for a week and I haven't seen anyone able to keep up with him. Sean frowned, obviously interested in my trainer. Me and my grandma met eyes just for a second. It didn't feel like I was keeping up with him. I shrugged, wincing at my sore shoulder. You definitely were. Everyone else got pummeled. Sean cringed. He made each of us fight him one-on-one to see what we're capable of. So that means he won't be my partner tomorrow? I asked cheerfully. My dread about tomorrow was dissipating by the second. I guess not. Sean shrugged, now tell me, who's your trainer? Stifling a nervous giggle, I replied, oh, just Grandma's neighbor. He's really skilled in jujitsu and stuff. I shrugged as if it weren't a big deal. I shot my grandma a sly look and she winked back at me. Do you have any plans for the weekend, Lola? My dad asked in between bites. Tomorrow was Friday, leaving Saturday and Sunday training free. Not really. I don't exactly have friends here anymore. I shrugged. In fact, I hadn't had any friends all year. My only company had been Grandma, Chris, and the employees of the supermarket we would often go to. I didn't feel the need to surround myself with people anymore. You could always talk to Brianna, you know. Sean shrugged as if it weren't a big deal. I sighed and bit my lip. I don't know about that. She's probably still mad at me, I know I would be. Brianna was one of my closest friends, but when Tyler and I started dating I set her to the side. Tyler had his own group of friends that didn't care for Brianna and like an IT I chose them over her. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Sean shrugged. I talked to her during practice and she asked how you had been. She said she felt terrible about what happened between you and Tyler. Really, she said that. I felt myself smile in spite of everything, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to talk to her. She did. It's been a year since then, Lola. She might have moved on from the past. Sean shrugged. After dinner I hopped in the shower, practically swaying on my feet from exhaustion. As sore as I felt, I knew it would only be worse in the morning. I flopped down in my bed and heard something crinkle beneath me. Groaning ever so dramatically, I rolled over and picked up the crumpled piece of paper I had laid on. Welcome home, Lola. The handwriting felt somewhat familiar, but I couldn't place where I had seen it before. What the hell? I mumbled, stuffing the note in one of my dresser drawers. Weirdo. I shrugged it off, letting my exhaustion take over as I fell asleep on top of my covers. I awoke in the morning bright and early, actually having remembered to set an alarm on my phone. One less thing to be called out for. I slipped on a gray sports bra and a matching pair of shorts. I even managed to put my long hair in a neat ponytail. I arrived at the pack house just in time. Feeling energized from breakfast and a full night of sleep, I made my way over to the rest of the trainees. As always, the large room we trained in was bare, only thin foam flooring protected us from the hard floor underneath. I see you're not late today. Sean smirked at me. I smirked back, I'm the poster child for responsibility. Hey, Lola. A feminine voice called out to me. I turned and looked into a pair of familiar dark eyes. Brianna gave me a small smile. I noticed how different she actually looked. Her dirty blonde hair was cropped short in one of those pixie cuts. Hey, Brianna. Good to see you. I smiled back at her. She gave me a small smile and a nod. You did good yesterday. I scoffed playfully, tell that to my sore body. I ran to the locker room and shoved my bag inside one of the lockers, rushing to get back before training started. Attention everyone. Alpha Maddox's deep voice called out. Not that I'd ever admit this, but his voice alone was incredible. His voice demanded your attention, while his words demanded your obedience. Pair off with your partners. You will each take turns switching between offensive and defensive moves. Alexander and Jax will provide help. Alpha Maddox called out to all of us. He looks even better today. Maya smirked. Hush, we're supposed to be paying attention. I grumbled at her. I let my eyes drift from his untidy hair to his honeycomb eyes. He really did look good today. He wore a simple black t-shirt and a pair of loose workout shorts. Once he was finished speaking, everyone paired off into their groups. I stifled a groan as I saw Alpha Maddox make his way over to me. I see you've managed to arrive on time today. His honeycomb eyes stared down at me, not conveying a single emotion. My eyes flickered to his chiseled jaw and I noticed the muscle in his jaw was still. I couldn't help but wonder if it only moved when he was pissed. You're going to test that theory, aren't you? Maya sighed, shaking her head. Don't tell me you aren't curious. I smirked when she remained silent. Unfortunate, isn't it? I sighed, batting my eyelashes at his unwavering face. My stomach did a little flip when he ran his fingers through his tousled hair, keeping a straight face as he looked on at me. Start with defense. His rough voice commanded me, and I huffed at him. Before I had the chance to take a breath, he was charging at me like a freight train. Defense is my stronger point. I'm small and fast, so I can typically get out of situations easily. Fighting against Alpha Maddox was an entirely different story. Every single move he made was calculated specifically for me. It was like he instantly knew his opponent's weaknesses and adjusted his technique to use it against him. The only thing I had against Alpha Maddox was my agility. I had taken gymnastics until I was 14, and still practiced what I had learned. Agility would have been more helpful if Alpha Maddox wasn't so fast. After what felt like hours, we switched to offense. I found it harder and harder to focus on training when this godlike man was trying to kill me. Even when he was being murderous, he looked good. You need to gain muscle. I can hardly feel your blows. Alpha Maddox snapped, pulling me from my creepy thoughts about him. I groaned and rolled my eyes at him. I'm only 105 pounds, there's only so much muscle I can have on my body. Not all of us can walk around jacked. If you fought as well as you talked, you may actually be a match for me. Alpha Maddox said in a cold voice. I ground my teeth together, trying to fight past the anger that boiled in my veins. I felt my fists clench and my fury take control. There was nothing I hated more than being treated as weak. Tyler would never let me start training, insisting I was too small to survive in a real fight. Joke's on him. Channeling my anger, I lunged at Alpha Maddox. I managed to easily dodge his attempt at slamming me to the ground. Rolling to the side and jumping to my feet, I swung my fist at the side of his face. I used all the strength I had in my body. I smiled as my fist made contact with Alpha Maddox's cheek. I also could have swore I broke my knuckle. Much to my dismay, Alpha Maddox looked completely unfazed. Training had ended, and after some weary glances in our direction, everyone either headed to the locker rooms or out the main door. He gave me a strange, speculating look and nodded once. Much better. He grunted, showing none of the signs of pain I had hoped for. Your anger makes you stronger. Alpha Maddox pointed out. His honey eyes had gold flecks swimming within them. Unable to hold the words back, I smirked. Thanks, I was thinking about you. Before Alpha Maddox could respond, I ran to the locker room. All of the girls were clearing out rapidly, and I grabbed the clean clothes from my bag. I cursed, noticing I had forgotten to grab a regular bra. I slipped my sweat-soaked sports bra off and slipped a t-shirt on. I swapped my workout shorts for a simple pair of jean shorts. I slammed the locker shut and turned around, nearly toppling over. Alpha Maddox stood a few inches away from me. His cold stare made me gulp. I felt my back hit the lockers as Alpha Maddox took a step forward. Do you get a kick out of being disobedient? His voice was quiet and rough. His eyes swirled with gold, making them even more mesmerizing. I took a slow breath, noticing how good he smelled. Husky from training yet earthy. The smell of sweat and cologne mixed to create something entirely new. I smirked up at him, hoping he couldn't hear my rapid heartbeat. I get a kick out of a lot of things. Being disobedient is just a personality trait of mine. You will obey your alpha. Alpha Maddox snapped, and I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Don't you dare, Lola. Maya snapped, knowing what I was about to say. And if I don't? I teased, keeping my eyes locked on the golden flecks that swirled in his orbs. Oops, too late. I snickered at Maya. If he kills us, I'm never talking to you again. Maya growled. Alpha Maddox took another step forward, and I could feel his chiseled abdomen against my chest. I found myself wanting to look down at his lips, and instantly rejected the idea. Now wasn't the time to act like a dog in heat. I was playing with fire and I needed my wits. I felt my nips stiffen as they brushed against Alpha Maddox's abdomen, and I resisted the urge to cringe. My stupid body was reacting in a way I hadn't expected. Alpha Maddox's gaze never left my own, but I was almost positive he could feel my hardened nips grazing against him. Don't test my patience, Lola. Alpha Maddox snapped, but I held my ground. For a second I worried I had pushed him too far, but not a single one of my instincts thought he was going to hurt me. For whatever reason, I felt safe. That thought didn't make me magically like Alpha Maddox though. I knew who I was toying with, and sooner or later it may come back and bite me. I tried not to freak out as I realized how close he was to me. I could feel his breath fanning my face. My apologies, Alpha. I smirked, batting my eyelashes. His eyes had progressively gotten more gold, and I let out a fast breath when he turned away and stormed out of the locker room. You got lucky. Maya huffed. I don't know about that. I mused. He didn't seem like he was going to hurt us. After taking a few much-needed moments to calm my hammering heart, I left the locker room and headed outside. Chapter 5. I gulped the fresh air and let the breeze cool my heated skin. What the hell was that about? Maya murmured, referring to my uncontrollable body parts. I shrugged, I have no idea. Can't really blame me though, he is smoking hot. You're right there. Maya smirked, and a nice ass. I scoffed, you mean, he is an ass. Well, if it isn't Lola. Never thought I'd see your face again. A CKY voice called out. I grimaced as Ethan made his way up to me. Ethan didn't seem to change at all. He still had that lanky build with hints of muscle, and his blonde slicked back hair. He looked just as sleazy as ever. "Ethan, so good to see you," I said sarcastically, rolling my eyes at his stupid smirk. I walked away and groaned as he followed. "Your legs are too short. There's no escaping me." Ethan smirked proudly and I stifled a gag. "Unfortunately," I mumbled. I remembered very clearly his smug look when Tyler found his mate and left me in the dust. He was always encouraging Tyler to go out and try new girls. Thinking back on it, Tyler probably did cheat on me. Not that it mattered anymore. Ethan smirked, walking much too close to me. "So how are you doing since the whole Tyler thing? Kind of embarrassing, hey?" His mocking tone made my blood boil and I came to a halt. "Listen here," I growled, taking a step closer. "It's been a year. An entire year. Now back the hell off before I knock your teeth out." I spat. I turned on my heel and left Ethan's annoying face in the dust. "Ooh, she's still feisty." I heard his voice call out, and I flipped him the bird as I walked away. "Still annoying as ever, isn't he?" Brianna rolled her eyes, making me jump. I had been so wrapped up in my thoughts that I hadn't noticed her standing there. Insufferable. I feel awful for his future mate. I rolled my eyes, refusing to glance in his direction. Brianna gave me a small smile. "So, where are you headed?" "Oh, I'm just going home." I shrugged, glancing at her. I couldn't help the guilt that swirled around me when I thought of her. What kind of best friend drops you for a boyfriend? "My house is on the way. Mind if I walk with you?" She smiled. "Not at all." I was kind of surprised, but I knew I needed to apologize for what had happened between us. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? You know I'm not good with apologies, but I'm sorry for being the worst friend ever." I frowned. Judging from the look on her face, I definitely caught her by surprise. "I forgave you when I found out what happened between you and Tyler." She shrugged as if it were no big deal. That was always one of my favorite things about Brianna. She never made a big deal out of things, and she wasn't one for drama or gossip. It's a kid at the time, but I honestly feel lucky. I scoffed, trying to imagine myself as Tyler's Luna. Brianna chuckled. "As mean as this may sound, losing Tyler was the best thing that ever happened to you. You were always way too good for him." "Well, thank you for that." I elbowed her side and gave her a playful smile. For once, the thought of leaving and going back to Grandma's wasn't so appealing. With Tyler gone, I felt like I could actually start over here. The only thing that would have made it better was my mom. The thought sent a sharp pang running through me. "So, fill me in. What has life been like since I left?" I asked, and listened intently as she gave me a rundown. Brianna told me how her older sister and finally found her mate in a neighboring pack and was currently pregnant with her first child. Only a handful of our pack members actually died in the fight, my mom included. Alpha Maddox was quick to end the fighting once our side surrendered, and once he realized our Alpha had abandoned them. I hadn't realized before, but some part of me blamed Alpha Maddox for the death of my mom. I knew it wasn't directly his fault, but the blame was still there. The rest of the blame I placed directly on Tyler's shoulders. "So, are you excited to find your mate?" I smirked at her, watching a light blush fill her cheeks. She shrugged. "I'm not pressed about it." I could tell there was something she wasn't telling me, but I let it slide for now. "So what have you been up to?" She quickly changed the subject. I have her the very short rundown of what my year consisted of. While it sounded boring, it had been the best year of my short life. So does that mean you can kick all of our asses now? Brianna chuckled, referring to the intensive training I went through for a year. I giggled, I'd sure like to think so. You held up against Alpha Maddox pretty well. She shrugged. You think so? Sean said the same. I frowned. Did getting punched and kicked over 100 times classify as good fighting? Brianna shuddered. Yeah, that's actually really good. Alpha Maddox fights like a monster, I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, neither have I. I shook my head, wondering if Alpha Maddox was on some kind of magical werewolf steroids or something. As far as I knew, nothing like that existed, but I still wondered. Did you see Chelsea earlier at training? Brianna snorted, gauging my reaction on my old friend. My eyes widened. Chelsea was in training? I hadn't even seen her. I shrugged, thinking back on my old friend. Yup, she's obsessed with Alpha Maddox. Brianna rolled her eyes. She hasn't changed at all. Her words made me feel funny for some reason. She really hasn't, I frowned. She was always obsessed with Tyler. She wants to be Luna. Brianna shook her head. I shuddered at the thought of Chelsea becoming Luna. That would be wonderful. I said sarcastically. Brianna chuckled. Even the old you would have made a better Luna than her. I gave her a smirk. Why, thank you for that, but I'm done with alphas. I shook my head. Are you sure about that? Brianna giggled. What was up with you and Alpha Maddox? I shrugged. I just piss him off. He wants me to be obedient. I rolled my eyes. I may be a werewolf, but I'm not a dog. Lola the golden retriever had a good ring to it, but I think I'd look better as a husky. I'm surprised he hasn't killed you yet. Brianna shook her head at my stupidity. I shrugged. The guy's like 6'3" and almost 200 pounds, he probably just doesn't see me as a threat. That's true, Brianna snorted. You looked like a kid when you trained with him. She cackled. Not everyone can be 5'8" with long legs, ma'am. I grumbled at her, but a smile quickly formed on my face when Brianna struck a pose. If you keep complimenting me like that, I'm gonna start thinking you're my mate. She cackled and I could stifle my giggles. Brianna invited herself over for dinner at my house, and I didn't mind one bit. Brianna had met my grandma a handful of times when we were kids and she loved the woman. Grandma loved Brianna's honesty and bluntness. Grandma always said Brianna and I were practically sisters with the way we act. We all sat around the table and ate the dinner Grandma had made. Dad was looking so much better, his skin wasn't translucent like it had been. Sean teased me for being stuck with Alpha Maddox again while my dad feared for my safety. I tried to assure him Alpha Maddox wouldn't kill me, but he didn't buy it. I kept my disobedient behavior towards our Alpha quiet. The last thing I needed was Dad and Sean finding out. They'd think I had some kind of death wish. Brianna and I made plans Sunday to hang out and maybe grab some lunch at the cafe in town. I rolled into bed after dinner sore as all hell. While it was only 7 p.m. I wanted a head start on going to bed. I was looking forward to sleeping my Saturday morning away. I realized the full extent of my bad luck when an annoyingly attractive voice rang out in my head. Lola, report to my office at 9 a.m. Alpha Maddox's rough voice spoke through the mind link. Come on, Alpha. I groaned, it'll be Saturday. 9 a.m, Lola. His rough voice growled and ended the mind link. I grumbled and turned over in bed, and let sleep claim me. Saturday would have been so much easier if I had just remembered to set alarm. Chapter 6. I rolled over in bed with a sleepy moan. I was having the most wonderful dream that involved several underdressed men, one of which may or may not have resembled Alpha Maddox. I didn't care about the details. My eyes fluttered open and my sleepy yawn filled the air. That had been the best night of sleep I had in a long while. The events of yesterday had yet to catch up with me as I sat up in bed and stretched. Just as I was about to stand up from the bed, my eyes darted to a figure in the corner of my room. "What the hell?" I gasped, looking into the furious face of Alpha Maddox. He was sitting in the corner of the room on a navy love seat my dad had gotten me when I was 13. "You talk in your sleep." He spoke, his tone calm while his eyes continued to burn. He looked at me strangely and I wondered what I had said in my sleep. I glared at Alpha Maddox. Alpha Maddox looked good. Being furious only made him hotter. He wore a simple black button-down shirt, but the sleeves were rolled up, exposing his muscular forearms. I sputtered, at a loss for words. "What the hell are you doing in my room?" I gasped. I could feel my face turning red. His face remained flat whilst his golden-flecked eyes burned with fury. 9A.M, Lola. He repeated those familiar words and I felt my body stiffen as I remembered last night's events. I let my eyes flicker to the alarm clock by my bed and went wide-eyed when I looked at the time. 11 a.m. "We're in deep sh*T. Maya muttered sleepily. "I should feel frightened, right? I've been pissing off the deadliest Alpha for 3 days now, and yet I was still alive." As if Alpha Maddox could read my mind, he stood from his seat in the corner and walked towards me. I kept my face blank, my eyes taking in every inch of him. He took his time approaching me, like a wolf stalking its kill. "You couldn't set a simple alarm, Lola?" Alpha Maddox's voice was hard, and I tried not to be mesmerized by the golden flakes in his eyes. I wasn't sure why I was so unable to control my mouth around him. Even with the hairs on my body standing on end, I only felt one thing. Excitement. I forgot. I bit my lip sheepishly. "We're dead." Maya groaned, "You and your big mouth killed us." "So dramatic, Maya." I rolled my eyes at her. A startled squeal left my lips as Alpha Maddox shoved me against my bedroom wall. The pictures hanging on the wall rattled with the impact. His rough hands yanked my arms down, but his eyes never left my own. Something had to be wrong with me. Instead of feeling afraid, I felt angry. If he thought he could manhandle me into obedience, he had another thing coming. "You are testing my patience, Lola." Alpha Maddox growled. His eyes had become completely gold and I stared into their depths unwavering. He towered over me as I was trapped against the wall. His earthy cologne scent was everywhere. It wasn't that it didn't smell good, it was just really strong. My heart nearly stopped in my chest when I felt his giant hand wrap around my throat. I stubbornly kept my eyes on his. There was no way in hell I was going to submit. Naturally, Maya squirmed at my defiance. It was against her nature to disobey her Alpha. "This is your last chance, Lola." Alpha Maddox growled. His hot breath fanned my face and his fingers exuded the smallest amount of pressure against the soft flesh of my neck. Any control I had over my body wavered. I could feel my hard feelings against him. I told myself it was only natural that I was attracted to him. He was breathtakingly gorgeous and an alpha. She-wolves were naturally attracted to the strongest of our species. His golden eyes conveyed no emotion other than anger as he looked down at me. I didn't fight it when a smirk formed on my lips. I let my eyes widen in mock fear. "My last chance, hey." Alpha Maddox leaned his face into mine, his furious eyes locked on my own. His lips were only inches away and I resisted the insane urge to look down at them. Next time you will be punished, and I will not be gentle. Remember that the next time you disobey me. Alpha Maddox growled, sending a wave of excitement down my spine. I almost felt disappointed when he pulled away and opened my bedroom door. You start patrol Monday 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Report at the Southwest Base. Do not be late. His voice was deadly calm, and my bedroom door clicked shut quietly. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My mind was churning. I chalked my arousal up to Alpha Maddox's godlike looks. Something within me was attracted to the thought of being punished by Alpha Maddox. I shook the dirty thoughts from my head and hopped in the shower. Once I was finally dressed, I came downstairs. The smell of my grandma's lavender pancakes wafted around the house. I know it sounds weird, but lavender is amazing in just about anything. What did Alpha Maddox need you for? My dad frowned. Strange that he came all the way over here. Well. I trailed off, wondering if I should lie. He kind of told me to report to his office this morning, and I didn't. I smiled sheepishly at my dad's outraged expression. Are you trying to get yourself killed, Lola? My dad nearly shouted. It was just a misunderstanding, I shrugged. I forgot to set an alarm. Was he angry with you? Did he hurt you? My dad bombarded me with questions. No way I was going to tell him the truth about what happened in my room. He was angry, but he didn't hurt me. I shrugged. I could practically feel his hand still wrapped around my neck. My dad let out a weary sigh. You need to be more careful, Lola. I nodded. I know, Dad. I will, I promise. I added for his benefit. My grandma shot me a sly smirk and I wondered what that was about. Sean came downstairs shortly after, and he too had asked why Alpha Maddox had come for a visit. He was just as amused as Dad was. I ended up stopping by the local coffee shop after breakfast, craving one of the iced mochas they were famous for. When Brianna and I were still best friends, we would come here at least 3 times a week. I sipped my coffee and nearly moaned at the taste. The only thing lacking at Grandma's little cottage was the short supply of coffee. I nearly spat out my coffee when I heard a nasal laugh call out behind me. I turned around and locked eyes with Chelsea. She definitely looked the same, and I wondered if anyone had actually changed around here. Her skin was still as tan as ever, and her sandy blonde hair reached down to her collarbones. She didn't seem surprised to see me, and I remembered she was in training with the rest of us. A mean smirk formed on her face as she walked up to me, a dark-haired girl clinging at her side. Lola, never thought I'd see you again. She smiled cruelly. The dark-haired girl at her side snickered. I smirked at the two of them and shrugged. Well, I'm back. Whatever. I'd say welcome back and all that, but I really don't care. She shrugged. I couldn't believe I was ever friends with her. I snorted, good to see some things never change. Her fake smile became mean in an instant and like a startled cat she lashed out. That makes one of us. Everything's changed for you though, hasn't it? No longer the Alpha's favorite. Thank God you didn't become Luna. Goddess only knows how I managed to put up with you. I rolled my eyes. Changed for the better, you mean? I don't need to be with an Alpha to know my worth. That's something you should try and live by. I turned around and headed back to the town's square. Ignoring the stares of some of the people around town, I walked into the town center and sat down on a bench. I sipped my coffee and let my eyes wander over the large fountain in the middle of the square. From afar this town looks quaint and normal, if only the humans knew what really lived here. As always, my peace was interrupted. "Hey, Lola!" Ethan's voice called out. I rolled my eyes and began to stand from the bench. "Achman, Lola! You don't have to leave. Can't we just have a normal conversation?" Ethan frowned. I gave him a scrutinizing look. Ethan wasn't one for normal conversations. "Sure, whatever. But the minute you get all, I'm leaving." I shrugged, but definitely didn't let my guard down. "Oh, you know I was just playing about yesterday," Ethan teased, and I rolled my eyes. His blonde hair wasn't slicked back in its normal style, it sat tousled on his head. Sure, Ethan was a fairly attractive guy. He could almost be called hot, but all of that faded away once you got to know his personality. "Sure you were," I muttered, sipping on my coffee. Ethan plopped down on the bench next to me and leaned back. I gave him a what look when he let his arm rest on the bench behind me. "So, what have you been up to this past year?" He shot me a smirk. "Went to my grandma's, trained and graduated high school." I shrugged. Ethan frowned. "You know, Tyler was actually distraught when he heard you left. He tried to figure out where you went, but your folks wouldn't tell him anything." That small shriveled part of my heart that once loved Tyler squeezed at what Ethan had said, but my mind knew better. Tyler tossed me away like trash and his friends did the same. It was pathetic irony that Tyler tossed his own pack away as well. I rolled my eyes at Ethan. "Look, I genuinely don't care. I don't see how that's hard to understand." I could feel someone's eyes on me and looked around to find the source. I locked eyes with Alpha Maddox, who stood across the town square talking to a couple men. I assumed the men weren't new additions to his pack due to the scars that littered their body. Was everyone in Alpha Maddox's pack so scary looking? Ethan's voice pulled my eyes away from Alpha Maddox's. Ethan leaned closer to me, invading my personal space. Invading someone's personal space was an Ethan specialty. "So you've really moved on, huh?" Ethan asked, his eyes roaming my face as though he were searching for something. I shrugged. "Yep. You know, I never said this before, but I always kind of liked you." Ethan gave me a lopsided smile. "Ethan, you say that to every girl." I looked at him with a straight face. Ethan acted like I wounded him. "I mean it with you though. You're gorgeous and you have a body." I resisted the urge to gag. I officially had enough of this conversation. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said sweetly, standing from the bench to walk away. I glanced over at Alpha Maddox and felt a smug pang roll through me as I caught him looking. Ethan muttered something under his breath loud enough for me to hear. "You never played this hard to get with Tyler." Did he really just say that? Maya growled in my head. I could feel Maya try to push herself forward, and I reacted on instinct. I dumped my poor iced mocha down Ethan's head. Maya howled with laughter while I mourned the loss of my coffee. "Ethan." I gave him one last sweet smile. I could feel Alpha Maddox's eyes on my back as I walked away. Chapter 7. I walked down the street, wondering if the smirk I had was permanently etched onto my face. At least Alpha Maddox now knew that I acted this way all of the time. Even with a new Alpha in charge, things in this small town remained the same. Only a handful of people had actually changed. Unfortunately, none of had changed. I wandered around aimlessly, missing the taste of mocha coffee on my tongue. Did we really have to dump the coffee on him? I grumbled. Maya rolled her eyes. "What else did you expect us to do?" "I don't know." I sighed. "Throat punch him." Maya's ears perked up. I wish I would have thought about that. Can we go back? I snickered at her, maybe next time. I'm sure this won't be the last time he says some stupid sh*t. Promise. Maya sounded hopeful. I headed back home, feeling as though my day had been completely uneventful. When I walked in the door, I was greeted by the smell of my grandma's cooking. Plates of sweets were scattered all along the counter, and she was just pulling a pan of brownies out to cool. Ooh! I cooed, reaching to pick up one of her cookies when she smacked my hand away. Not for you, miss. My grandma scolded me, they're for the other families in this pack that lost someone in the fight. I sighed, the cookies really did look amazing. My grandma's stern look softened and she handed me a cookie. Now go outside and help your dad with the garden. She pushed me towards the back door and I groaned. Don't sass me. You have your cookie, now go. She shooed me away. I stuffed the cookie into my mouth and groaned at the chocolate. Why goodness. I could see my dad on his knees digging up some of the dead flowers. Mom always had a huge garden, something she had picked up from Grandma. I see the dictator has ordered you to work too. My dad grumbled with a smile on his face. Yes, sir. I smirked, getting down to help him. Did she pay you with sweets too? My dad chuckled. I laughed at him. Yup, she gave me a cookie. Really? I got 2 cookies and a brownie. My dad smirked while my mouth opened in shock. Grandma, that's not fair. I yelled towards the back door. Her head popped out and looked between the two of us. What isn't fair? You gave him more than me. I gave her a pout. Equal wages for equal work. I protested. She smirked at me. Your dad was out here since you left this morning. And with that she popped her head back inside. You want to sneak some when she isn't looking? My dad proposed, earning a sly smile from me. I snickered. You know she's gonna catch us, right? Not if we run fast enough. My dad shrugged, but a smile played at his lips. I'm still fast for an old man. Neither one of us is gonna be fast if we keep eating her sweets. I cackled, ripping up another dead plant. Dad frowned. You're most certainly right. We made small talk as we pulled the dead plants from my mom's garden. We pulled the small saplings out of their containers and planted them with the soil my grandma bought. Hours had passed and we were finally finished. I looked at the now lively garden and smiled. Mom would like this. I smiled at Dad, pointing to the gardenias scattered about. My dad chuckled. She'd be surprised to see us working in the garden. She'd probably freak out and say we were doing it wrong. We both laughed until tears burned our eyes. Mom was hard to get along with, but that didn't change the place she held in my heart. Grandma called us inside and handed us each a sandwich, bag of chips and a soda. After munching on our food, I headed back outside. An errant thought crossed my mind and I remembered the swimming hole Tyler and I used to go to. We never told anyone else about it, keeping it between ourselves. It was one of the most magical things I had ever seen. It was nestled deep in the woods, far off any path. The best thing about the swimming hole was that the patrol teams never got close enough to find it. Impulsively, I turned around and headed in the direction of the woods. I crossed countless houses and a few shops until the buildings became much scarcer. I crossed the street and walked through a playground for children. I peeked around to make sure no one was looking, and slipped into the woods. It was almost a 30-minute hike through the woods until I could hear the running water. My face broke out into a smile when I looked at the swimming hole. It looked even better than it had. The water was crystal clear. The waterfall at the top was roaring as it splashed into the pond's surface. Tyler and I had spent countless summers sneaking off to the swimming hole. When I looked at this place, all of the memories that accompanied it popped into my head. I was surprised at how happy I felt. It had taken me almost 6 months to fully move on from Tyler, but I was completely at ease now that I had. "Well, are you just gonna stand here and stare at it?" Maya teased me. I giggled and stripped down to my bra and underwear, setting my clothes against one of the many trees. I climbed up to the top of the waterfall and jumped in with an excited squeal. The cool water felt amazing on my heated skin. This was definitely the best way to cool off after gardening for hours. I swam under the waterfall and giggled as it rushed over my head, making pieces of my hair cling to my face. I took deep breaths of the humid air around me. The smell was always one of my favorite parts of the hidden swimming hole. It smelled like clean water and damp earth. I swam over to one of the large rocks protruding from the water and pulled myself up onto it. The rock was the perfect size and shape to lay out on. The water lapped at my knees, submerging my feet in their cool depths. My mind wandered back to when Tyler and I would come here. We'd have some pretty heavy make-out sessions here, and occasionally I would let him roam his hands over my body. We never made it further than that, thankfully. I let my mind wander, and was surprised when Alpha Maddox made his way into my thoughts. While the man irritated me to no end, it was fun making him angry. I thought about the way he looked this morning, how his anger made him even s*****. I snapped out of my thoughts when I realized my hand had traveled much lower on my body, running along my dampened slit. While my brain recoiled at the thought of touching myself to Alpha Maddox, it had been such a long time since I pleasured myself. I let out a small sigh. My small moans filled the quiet forest and I gave myself over to the sensations filling my body. My head snapped forward at the sound of rustling bushes. I wrote it off as a deer or some other animal. The cool water turned hot as Alpha Maddox stepped into view, his toffee-colored eyes swirled with gold. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How in the hell did he find me out here? Did he follow me? I yanked my hand from my underwear and slid into the water. My heart pounded in my chest at the thought of him catching me, but I couldn't place whether it was embarrassment or excitement. I submerged myself in the water up to my collarbones, keeping my eyes locked on his face. "Get out of the water, Lola!" His rough voice commanded me. I looked at him stubbornly, wondering what he thought he was doing. I wasn't in the wrong here. I was simply minding my business, enjoying myself and the water. It was him who came along and disrupted my peace. "Lola!" His voice came out as a warning. I was already testing his patience, not that he had much to spare. "Get out of the water!" he snapped, his muscular body was tense. Some relaxation would do him well. I glared at his godlike face. "No. No." His eyebrow raised as his eyes seared my skin. He sounded as though he had never heard that word before. Did I stutter? My glare quickly became a smirk as I felt the anger that radiated from him. Any other wolf would be cowering in fear by now. I wonder why I was different. His voice took on that calm tone, the one that sent shivers down my spine. "Have you already forgotten what I told you this morning?" My smirk deepened. "I didn't forget, I just decided I didn't care." "Get out of the water, Lola." His eyes were much more gold now. "This is the last time I will repeat myself." I let myself get a good look at him in that moment. His black t-shirt clung to every dip of his muscles, while his biceps struggled to break free of the material. "If you want me out, you're gonna have to come and get me." I shrugged. There was no way he'd come in here and pull me out. He'd probably just storm away and confront me later on. How many threats would he give me until he actually did something? I nearly choked on the air in my lungs when he sauntered forward, stepping into the water as if it hadn't been there. I was thankful my dress were submerged, the only thing visible was my neck and face. "Don't you dare!" I warned him, letting myself drift backwards and away from him. He cut through the water as if it hadn't been there. I let out an angry wail as he grabbed me roughly and threw me over his shoulder. "Let me down, now!" I yelled at him, letting my fists pound his stupid, chiseled back. Anger bubbled in my veins as he walked through the water with me over his shoulder. What reason did he have to follow me and torment me? Alpha Maddox walked through the water as if it weren't there. I felt my back slam against the rough bark of a tree, and I knew if I looked there would be tons of scratches. I brought my arms up to cover my chest. "Do not cover yourself from me," he growled, yanking my hands down so they were at my sides. I glared into his golden eyes, looking for any motion within them. His eyes remained focused on my own, not even glancing down at my chest. "What were you doing, Lola?" he growled, my name rolling off his tongue like a seductive song. I stammered for a response. It was hard to think when he was standing so close to me. He trapped me in front of the tree. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied, trying to inch myself away from him and the tree, but he grabbed my arm and yanked me back into place. I couldn't fight against the throbbing in between my legs nor the sudden wetness that soaked my panties. "Going to play dumb, are we?" Maya smirked in my head. He leaned in close enough for me to smell his breath. Water dripped from his chin, landing on my temple and running down my cheek. "You were making an awful lot of noise for someone who doesn't know what I'm talking about," he growled, and this time I couldn't resist the urge to glance down at his lips. I could feel the wetness. He noticed my action and growled. "Look at me," he demanded, grabbing my chin with his large hand. I peeled my eyes from his soft-looking lips and stared into his golden orbs. His eyes hardened, and I could tell he had surpassed anger. His next words were spoken with a calm voice, but his eyes held all of the emotion he chose not to convey. "I warned you, didn't I?" His calm voice sent goosebumps forming on my skin, and I couldn't help the tremble that came over me. "What are you doing?" I snapped as he forced his thigh in between my legs. His voice still held that terrifying calmness. "I'm finishing what you started, Lola. I told you countless times that you would be punished for your disobedience." Somehow I knew it wasn't that simple. Any other words were caught in my throat. I clamped my lips together, fighting the moan that built in my throat. There's no way I'd let him think I was enjoying this. His golden eyes never left my own. I could feel the pressure and I struggled to keep my composure as I neared closer and closer to bliss. "Please." The word escaped my lips. I could feel my legs tremble. Alpha Maddox's voice was still calm as his eyes looked into my own. "What was that, Lola? You want me to continue?" He lessened the pressure and began to move his hand away. "Yes, please." I couldn't control my lips any longer. Alpha Maddox removed his hand from me and took a step away, his blazing eyes staring at my flushed face. "Think of this next time you openly disobey me." His voice was hard. I watched with trembling legs as he picked my clothes off the ground and tossed them at me. "And put some clothes on," he demanded calmly as he walked away. I waited a few minutes until I knew he was gone and slid to the ground. I exhaled, wondering if I had just imagined what happened. I wondered if he did this to every woman who disobeyed him, and I couldn't stop the grimace that fell over my face. Even though I told him to stop, my body acted as though it were the hottest thing in the world. I sat against the rough tree in my bra and underwear. The only thing that kept me from giving into the idea that I imagined it all, was the throbbing emanating from between my legs. There was only one thing I was 100% sure of: I was definitely going to disobey Alpha Maddox again. Chapter 8. After what felt like hours of silent shock, I threw my clothes on and trudged home. I still couldn't form coherent words about what had just happened, or my body's reaction to it. While my blood boiled at how bold Alpha Maddox acted, the sensitive spot in between my legs throbbed. I was torn between hating it and loving it. Maya was silent for once, leaving me to my internal struggle. When I finally got home, I ran to my room to change out of my damp clothes. I threw on a plain t-shirt and a pair of cotton shorts. I joined the rest of my family for dinner and was happy to find my grandma had saved some sweets for me after all. Sean turned to me as we were eating dinner. "So, Lola, why'd you dump coffee on Ethan's head?" A smirk formed on his face. My dad snorted and nearly choked on his food as he gave me a shocked look. Quickly, his face turned red as he started chuckling. "Lola, can't you stay out of trouble?" he cackled, and my grandma soon joined in. I shrugged, rolling my eyes at the two of them. He acted like an ass. I didn't need to give more information than that. Sean and my dad knew exactly how Ethan was. Should have done more than that. Sean chuckled. I shrugged. The coffee was Maya's idea. I wanted to punch him in the throat. That comment sent my grandma into fits of laughter. After dinner I helped my grandma with the dishes and quickly headed to bed. I was excited to sleep in before going to lunch with Brianna tomorrow. What person gets excited about sleep? I do. I took my clothes off and threw them on the bed, then made my way to the shower. When I was finished I threw the same t-shirt and shorts on. I frowned at my pillow, noticing the folded piece of paper that sat on it. I could have sworn it wasn't there when I had slipped my clothes off. How did someone get it in my room without me hearing? And more importantly, why was there no scent? I grimaced as I turned the paper in my hand, my eyes widening at the picture that fell from it. I could easily make out my own form in the photo. I was standing in front of the woods, looking around as I slipped inside. That was taken today, as I was heading to the secret swimming hole. I set the picture on my dresser and let my eyes scan over the note. "You shouldn't be wandering around alone, Lola." The weird note set me on edge and I wondered who it could be. I couldn't see Alpha Maddox doing this. He already tormented me in person. The only other people that came to mind were Chelsea, Tyler, or Ethan. There was no way Tyler would get close enough to this pack to leave a note in my room, not with Alpha Maddox trying to end his life. Ethan seemed like a flimsy suspect, but I could totally see Chelsea doing something like this. I rolled my eyes and stuffed the note in my dresser. Without a second thought, I climbed into bed and sleep. I woke up screaming. Someone was shaking me, and the second I opened my eyes, I noticed someone's face much too close to my own. "Geez, Lola!" Brianna groaned, clapping her hands over her ears. "You're gonna bust my eardrum." "What the hell?" I gasped, sitting up in bed as I glared at her. "Dude, it's almost 1 in the afternoon." She rolled her eyes, placing her hands on her narrow hips. "And you couldn't wake me up like a normal person?" I raised my eyebrow at her, dragging myself out of bed. She shrugged, a mischievous smile on her face. "It didn't cross my mind." "Oh, I'm sure." I rolled my eyes at her. I grabbed a thigh-length floral dress and slipped it on, throwing on a pair of black sneakers as well. I didn't bother shooing Brianna away as I changed. I had been raised with Brianna. We first shifted together as kids, so nudity was never an issue between us. Since when did you get muscular? Brianna asked, sitting on the love seat in my room as I brushed through my hair. I shrugged. An entire year of training does that. I need to go wherever you went. Brianna chuckled. I'm sure Grandma would be more than happy to take you in. I giggled. I wish. After the fight with Alpha's pack, my mom has become a little overbearing. Brianna shuddered. I frowned. I understand that though. My mom was her close friend. I understand it, but that doesn't mean I enjoy it. Brianna frowned as well. How are you doing with that though? I can't imagine it. I was silently thankful for Brianna's carefree attitude and the fact that she didn't feel the need to coddle me. I'm dealing with it. I shrugged. Maybe I handle death weird, but I don't know. It's sad and I miss her like crazy, but I don't feel like breaking down all the time. Hey, everyone grieves differently. Brianna shrugged, changing the subject to the cafe we were going to eat at. We walked a couple blocks to the cafe, not bothering to take her car. The weather felt amazing and I didn't mind wasting the time. The cafe had quickly changed in the time I had been gone. It used to have this old-fashioned feel to it, but now it was completely modernized. I like it. I nodded, looking around at the decor approvingly. Brianna nodded in agreement. They updated the menu too. The avocado burger is amazing. She laughed as she licked her lips. We chatted over lunch, rekindling the strong friendship we once had. The day went by quickly and before I knew it, I was climbing into bed. Part of me dreaded training tomorrow morning. The bruises had just faded from my last training session with Alpha Maddox. Luckily, I remembered to set my alarm for training. I met Brianna outside and we walked to the pack house together. After dropping our bags off in the locker room, we made our way to the mats. We stood and chattered for a few more moments, only stopping when Alpha Maddox walked in. He was flanked by two men, who I learned were Alexander and Jax. Both men were huge, covered head to toe in various scars. I could see why Alpha Maddox's pack was so intimidating. All of the men were giant and scarred. Attention everyone, Alpha Maddox's deep voice silenced everyone in the room. His very presence demanded everyone's undivided attention. Pair off into your groups and begin, Alexander and Jax will be around to help. And with that everyone scattered. I reluctantly made my way over to Alpha Maddox, dreading the next few hours. We have a new addition, Alpha Maddox told me, his honey-colored gaze locked on my own. You will be his partner for the time being. A guy I hadn't seen before approached Alpha Maddox and I. He was cute in a boyish sort of way. He had light blonde hair and chocolate-colored eyes. His build was muscular, but not giant like Alpha Maddox and his men. The guy had a round baby face that made him cuter, and a cheeky smile that brought one to my own face. I could feel Alpha Maddox's eyes on me as I turned to greet the new addition. Are you gonna do what I think you're gonna do? Maya chuckled and I smirked in response. If you mean try to make Alpha Maddox jealous, then yes I am. I snickered. I'm Mason. He smiled at me, and I felt my lips turn up in response. He was much taller than me, but then again everyone is. Lola. I nodded at him. He gave me a goofy smirk. I'll try to take it easy on you then, Lola. I giggled mischievously. Oh don't worry, I can take care of myself. We'll see about that shorty. Mason chuckled and I followed him over to an empty space. I stifled my smirk when I glanced at Alpha Maddox's face, the gold swirls visible in his eyes. The second Mason attempted to hit me, I could tell he was trying to go easy on me. That fact annoyed me, but I decided to have some fun with it. Mason lunged forward, his arm extended to throw a punch at my face. He was slow even on human standards. I smirked as his fist got closer to my face, only moving when it was an inch away. I grabbed his fist with my hand and wrapped my leg around his arm in a move that Chris spent weeks teaching me. I twisted my torso and shifted my weight towards the ground, sending Mason tumbling forward. I rolled gracefully whilst Mason landed on his face. His head popped up from the floor, his blonde hair tousled as he looked at me with surprise. "I guess you can take care of yourself." He gave me a lopsided grin. I laughed at him. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The rest of practice went on swimmingly. Mason had some skill as a fighter, but he was much too slow to keep up with me. While he had strength on his side, I had speed. I watched the sweat trail down his biceps as he attempted punch after punch, unable to land a single one. "What are you?" Mason breathed heavily, tumbling to the ground. "Some kind of tiny ninja, you blew my cover, Mason." I giggled, rolling between his legs and nailing a solid kick to his balls. Mason groaned and doubled over. "That was a cheap shot, Lola." I giggled as his face turned red. I really hadn't kicked him hard. "You're right." I nodded, giving him a sympathetic smile. "I'm not very strong, so I have to hit where it counts. If my junk stops working, I'm coming for you." Mason warned, but a smile played at his lips. I gave him a look of mock horror and he rolled his eyes. For once, training ended on a good note. I didn't feel sore for once and I actually had a good time. Alexander and Jax helped me with my punches and kicks, and I realized they were much scarier up close. Attractive, but frightening. What was even better, I could feel Alpha Maddox's eyes on me the entire time. At the end of training I followed Mason out the doors and waited for Brianna to catch up. "You coming?" Mason turned around just as I stopped walking. I nodded in the direction of the pack house, waiting for a friend. "I'll wait with you." He smiled, leaning on the wall next to me. "You did great in there, Lola." A curvy girl with flaming hair grinned at me, giving me a small wave. I recognized her as a shy girl named Katie. She had lived next to Brianna for as long as I could remember. I smiled back at her. "Thanks." I called out. I frowned. "So why haven't I seen you around before?" Mason shrugged. "I was here for a couple years as a kid, but my grandpa got sick and needed help so we moved. He died last year and we finally decided to move back." "So, how old are you?" I blurted the first thing that came to mind, wanting to change the topic. Mason gave me a goofy smile that told me he appreciated my abrupt subject change. "I'm 19. And how old are you, Lola?" 18. I smiled back. "There you are. I was looking for you." Brianna smiled, the pack house doors closing behind her. I gave her an apologetic smile. "Brianna, this is Mason." "Mason, this is Brianna." I smiled at the two of them. "You sure you wanna put up with her, Mason?" Brianna smirked. "She beat you pretty hard today." I stifled a giggle at Brianna's blunt self. "Oh, she did? I had no idea she was that skilled." Mason chuckled. "I don't think she's too bad though." He smirked as he shot me a quick wink. Brianna walked home with the two of us. We all laughed and exchanged stories about our childhood. Brianna left first. Her house was the first on our block. Mason and I approached my house and I turned to see him off. "Is this your place?" Mason's eyes roamed over the house I had grew up in. I shrugged. "Yup, that's home." "So has Alpha assigned you patrol duty yet?" Mason turned away from my house with a grin on his face. I sighed, remembering I had to start today. "Yeah, I start at 6 p.m. His chocolate-colored eyes lit up, making him look like an excited kid. I start at the same time. I couldn't contain my grin at the sight of his excited face. Wanna meet up? Sure. I'll be at your place at 5:45 p.m. He grinned and gave me a wave before running off down the street. I went inside and managed to have a couple hours of downtime and dinner with my family. After taking a shower and throwing on a black tank top and leggings, it was almost time to go. A knock sounded on the door and I hopped off the couch. I almost knocked Mason down as I barreled out of the house. Being friends with Mason was effortless. Mason and Brianna were two of the easiest people to get along with. They were both genuinely nice and never excluded anyone. We reported to the posted patrol site and met up with the others on duty. After assigning groups and routes, we set off to scan our respective areas. Mason and I were paired, a lanky-looking guy named Kyle and a muscular girl named Ashlyn. Ashlyn gave us a friendly smile as we all shifted and took off running. Maya stretched her legs happily and bounded off after Mason and the others. While she wanted to run and explore, she set her mind to the task at hand. The wind rushing through your fur is an intoxicating feeling, the feeling of freedom. We ran the perimeter of our area and stopped for a few moments. We let our wolves simply wander, still scanning the area for any threats. Guys on the southern side. Something came barreling through the woods, we couldn't make out what it was. Most likely just a rogue. Keep your eyes peeled, it was heading in your direction. One of the patrol members called out through the mind link. Maya's fur bristled in excitement. She longed to run at her full capacity, to sink her teeth into something. The four of us froze as we heard the snapping of branches. The sound was coming from all around us. He said it was only one. Mason's sandy-colored wolf whipped its head around. I frowned and Maya let out a low growl. It sounds like more than one, but I trust the others. We need to split up. Kyle suggested, and it was a solid idea. Ashlyn's voice chimed in, they sound like they're moving. If it's only one, how can it be moving in two separate directions? We need to split up. Ashlyn and Kyle, take the left. Mason and I will head in the opposite direction. If anything approaches you, call the others. I barked orders at the three of them, and it was a strange feeling. Mason and I bounded off into the forest, letting our ears guide us to whatever was running. Something feels off. I mumbled. Whatever we were chasing had no scent. Typically rogues smelled like rotting flesh. A wolf who could cover their scent was incredibly strong and resourceful. You think so? Mason's wolf let out a low whine. The only sound was that of cracking branches, and paws hitting the wet earth. We skidded to a stop when we reached a small clearing. The only thing lighting up the clearing was the bright moon that hung in the sky. The rustling was coming from all around us and I growled in frustration. Whatever it is, it's circling us. Maya growled, her fur bristling at the thought of a fight. As soon as it began circling us, it all of a sudden came to a stop. The entire clearing was silent. It's gone. Mason's voice was laced with confusion. It wasn't running from us, it was leading us. I felt my eyes widen as a head of flaming hair came into view. What was she doing all the way out here? Call the others, Mason. My voice was quiet, but the strength in my words surprised me. I was never one to take control of a situation, but that was just something else that had changed about me. Mason started, but his question was cut short when he looked into her glassy eyes. Sitting against a tree, a mere 30 feet away was Katie. Her flaming hair rustled in the breeze as her green eyes peered lifelessly at the two wolves who approached her. The scarlet blood that soaked her neck was only a shade darker than her hair. Her throat was torn out and her mouth was open as though she were letting out a silent scream. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.